The divine power we call God exists, that heaven, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it, exists, that our souls are immortal living spirits, that we can communicate with souls, and that we will all be reunited with our loved ones in the afterlife frequency when it is our time, our appointed time, to leave this material world.
I'm pleased to bring you Mark Anthony, JD, Psychic Explorer, also known as the Psychic Lawyer. He is a fourth generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He is an Oxford educated attorney licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. He recently won the OMMIE Award for Best Psychic Medium. Mark appears nationwide on TV and radio, including CBS TV's The Dr. Gaia TV and Discovery Channel. He co-hosts the livestream show The Psychic and the Doc on Transformation Network. The Psychic Explorer travels to mystical locations in remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. He is a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, which include Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. Mark Anthony is the author of 3 best-selling books. His latest, The Afterlife Frequency, has won multiple awards, ranked as one of the top books about faith, and was up for a Pulitzer Prize. His other best-selling books are Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. He is also a VIP executive contributor for Best Holistic Life magazine. Mark, that is some introduction. I am pleased to have you with me today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Tia. It's great to be here.
You've accomplished quite a bit in your life, and you are here to kind of share some of those experiences and things that you've experienced throughout your life. I want to start out by talking, because you are a psychic lawyer or psychic explorer. What do you think about the word consciousness? What does the word consciousness mean to you?
Well, I write quite a bit about consciousness in my books, Evidence of Eternity, and even more so in The Afterlife Frequency. Consciousness is the who and what we are. It's our self-awareness. But in other words, it's when I say the who and what we are, in the realms of faith, you can call this a soul or a spirit. In the realms of science and psychology, it is referred to as consciousness. And consciousness is the energy of our being. In other words, we know from quantum physics that everything is made of molecules, which in turn are composed of atoms, which in turn are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are composed of the smallest particle of energy known as a quantum. That's where the term quantum physics comes from, and that's pure electromagnetic energy. And what that means to you is that everything from the subatomic level on up is composed at the most basic level of electromagnetic energy. That means you, me, the microphones we're talking into, the radio waves that the show is broadcast on, the light we see with the sun, the rings of Saturn and beyond are all on the subatomic level electromagnetic energy, which vibrates at different frequencies. That's why, something like this pen is what we would call an inanimate object, but on the subatomic level, it's made as the same electromagnetic energy that we are, but we vibrate at a different frequency. We know that the brain is only 2% of the body's weight, but through the study of neuroscience, we understand that it consumes 20% of the electrical system in the body. We know from the laws of thermodynamics, energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Then going to matters of faith, every great belief system from Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Native American spirituality, and I can keep going on, teaches us that the soul, the spirit, also known as consciousness, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. Which is why in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, after a lifetime of research and study, I developed the term the electromagnetic soul, the EMS, to describe in 21st century terms what we really are. which is pure consciousness, a soul or a spirit, that is eternal electromagnetic energy. So that, in a nutshell, is what consciousness means to me.
And so, can medical science help explain what how consciousness is created?
Absolutely not. And well, yes and no. Traditional neuroscience and neuroscience is the field of medicine which studies the human brain. And the official position, Tia, is that consciousness is caused by chemical reactions and electrical impulses within the brain, but they're completely at a loss to explain how it creates consciousness. So now other medical scientists and certainly afterlife researchers like myself and survival of consciousness studies, such as organizations through IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, the Galileo Commission, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences, are now coming out and saying that it appears that consciousness is not a localized thing. In other words, it really does pre-exist the body, come into the body, and then move on after the body dies. And in recent scientific discoveries and medical discoveries, we're now receiving evidence to see that appears to underscore and even ratify my EMS, electromagnetic soul theory.
Would you say the soul is more of a philosophical theory rather than something that can be proven scientifically?
Nope. And that's where my electromagnetic soul theory comes into play, because now we've got quantum physicists from several different major universities and institutes around the world saying that consciousness and eternal life do not violate the laws of physics. And where we get proof of this, back in 2/22/22, I can always remember that, February 22nd of 2022, 2/22/22, in Tartu, Estonia, an 87-year-old man started having epileptic seizures. He was rushed to the hospital, and the standard protocol is to hook up his head to an EEG, an electroencephalogram. And an EEG measures brainwave frequencies. The brain has 5 different main frequencies, gamma, which is like when you're on Final Jeopardy and your brain's just like cranking at full speed. Then beta, that's the state we're in now, activities for daily living and functioning. Alpha, I always joke and call alpha the groovy baby state, because that's where you start to relax, or to meditate, drift off the dreamful state, sleep. Then there is theta. Theta is where you dream. And then delta, not much brainwave activity going on, but delta is important because that's when your body heals and your cellular regeneration. But it's on the alpha theta border, and at around 8 hertz is where psychic and mediumistic activity occur. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, there's 5 brainwave frequencies. So back to Tartu, Estonia on 2/22/22. So this elderly man, he's being monitored to monitor what's going on in his brain because of his epilepsy. Then all of a sudden, he suffers a massive coronary and dies. Now, this was the first time in history that somebody was undergoing an EEG at the precise moment of death. What happened rocked the scientific world. All 5 brainwave frequencies went soaring off the charts. A huge surge in brainwave activity. Scientists, medical professionals, nobody expected this. The report was looked at by scientists the world over, and the general consensus was that this could be proof of what happens to somebody during a near-death experience, and may also invoke the life review. And of course, there were critics who started, saying, oh, well, so basically a near-death experience is the function of a dying brain. But then in November of 2022, that was a banner year for afterlife studies, there was the lucid dying study, which was a compilation of data from over, I think, almost 500 people at 25 different hospitals in both the US and the UK. And in that, people that went into cardiac arrest, They were being given CPR, and they were all administered EEGs, electroencephalograms, just like the guy in Estonia. And for those who survived, for everyone who died, excuse me, the data was the same. All 5 brainwave frequencies go soaring off the charts. For those who survived, 1 in 5, in other words, 20%, reported leaving their body, hovering around the room, going into the light, encountering deceased loved ones. Basically, not basically, a near-death experience. And then because they were resuscitated, they came back. Scientists the world over are saying now we have scientific proof that a near-death experience is a lot more than the function of a dying brain, because these people died. They flatlined, then they were resuscitated, and they come back with these stories. So what we're seeing now, Tia, is concrete scientific evidence that the electromagnetic soul theory, that the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, but not only that, survives physical death. So the electromagnetic soul, my theory is that our brain is a coherent EM field, a coherent quantum field that continues on in a lucid state after the body ceases to function.
Quantum physics is catching up with kind of spirituality. Back in the 70s, Dr. Moody came up with the term near-death experience, and we've kind of just been now catching up. What do you see for the future of this research?
I think it's very exciting. And what's happening now, Tia, is that in light of the discoveries back in 2022 with empirical data that how the brainwave frequencies go off the charts at the time of death, there's a surge of brain activity as opposed to it fizzling out. And also, now for 50 years, we've been studying near-death experiences, chronicling accounts of people who've left their bodies and then returned. And it's more than just, oh, I went and saw flowers and, and it was beautiful. There are people that return with what's known as veridical perception. They're able to give accurate accounts of what was happening around their body and even down the hall in a hospital, hearing what people were saying. And the more sophisticated our technology becomes, because there's harmonic frequencies that may be beyond what our technology is currently able to detect and quantify, but that's right now. And the cool thing about science and technology is it isn't stagnant. So we're on the threshold of tremendous discoveries, or rather ongoing discoveries, that the who and what we are, the consciousness, our brain, our electromagnetic soul, exists beyond physical death.
Can we ever get to the point where we understand what is beyond death rather than just the transition period?
I hope so. But I have my doubts because we are living in the material world. Like you and I are in these bodies. Think of our bodies like a bottle, and the brain is the cork in the bottle. So the brain is sort of the arbiter between our mortal living soul and what I call the afterlife frequency. In other words, that's why I termed or named my last book, The Afterlife Frequency. And for whatever reason, Tia, and I don't pretend to understand. I have some insights, but I don't pretend to understand, is that we are living in the material world for specific reasons. And our brain is geared for finite perception. Like pretty much what we know is limited to the perception of our 5 physical senses of sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. And for people like myself who've had a near-death experience, and for several of my colleagues, and also for people like myself that communicate with spirits, when we leave our body, when the cork is released, okay, the brain may die, but the brain's only hosting the soul. It didn't create it. It didn't create consciousness. It's kind of like your computer hard drive did not create the programs on it. It merely hosts them. And then when the computer crashes, you know, if you're Protestant, it goes to Microsoft Cloud. If you're Catholic, it goes to Dropbox. No, I'm kidding. But the reason I bring that up is your computer hard drive did not create the programs or the data on it. Neither did our brain. Okay, our brain's just a very sophisticated device which is able to host the consciousness. So when we revert to a purely energetic state, then we have an infinite perspective. And it's extremely difficult. Actually, it's beyond, I believe, the function of our brain to perceive and even begin to understand infinity. So I hope that answers your question.
It answers it as well as I think it can be answered right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that very much.
Yeah, I mean, I work with Dr. Gary Schwartz. He's at the University of Arizona, and he's working on the Soul Phone Project. And the Soul Phone Project is designed to actually tune into the other side. And this is like a lot of paranormal investigators. They use like the spirit box and K2 meters, infrared, and they'll pick stuff up like EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. You'll hear, hear a word or two from a spirit, and that's really great. But what Dr. Schwartz's Soul Phone Project, they're working on actually tuning into it and getting like a complete dialogue with that. And I would love to talk more about it, but I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so that's all I can really talk about. But thing is, though, this is not a new idea, and I know that everybody in the paranormal field is aware of Thomas Edison's spirit phone. And Thomas Edison, brilliant genius inventor, the last thing he was working on in the 1920s, a century ago, was a device sensitive enough to detect, as he said, incarnate intelligence. In other words, souls. And unfortunately, he died before he could complete work on it. So now, a century later, Dr. Schwartz and his team have the benefit of the last century of technological advances in both engineering and quantum physics. So let's keep our fingers crossed on the progress of the Soul Phone project.
Darn to that non-disclosure. I wish I could hear more, but
Well, yeah, I've been blessed. I believe in my life. I've seen some things, experienced some things, which at first glance defy rational explanation, except for the fact that everything, even the spiritual, is explainable if there's enough research, focus, and dedication put into it. And that's why, like when I wrote the Afterlife Frequency, I'm looking at all the different forms of spirit contact, mediumship, what I do, communicating with spirits, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, where more than one person experiences a transition and touching the other side, deathbed visions, where people who are dying, they will see deceased loved ones, out-of-body experiences, and even reincarnation. All of those are explainable through my EMS, electromagnetic soul theory, because as Nikola Tesla said, what one person calls God, another calls the laws of physics. And I believe that everything is explainable. It's just that, it's a work in progress. So it's coming, and it may happen within our lifetimes.
I've heard that this spiritual phenomenon, that type of experience, EVP, ghosts, even psychic experience, is just science that we haven't discovered yet, that we don't understand yet.
Well, that's why people should get my book, The Afterlife Frequency, because I do explain it. See, a lot of mediums, when they're interviewed, they say, well, how do you do this? They go, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, I do know. And I've done the research. It's taken years. There's a physiological basis. There's a quantum physics and a frequency basis. So everything's energy. Now, Albert Einstein said that matter is energy. Energy is light. We are all light beings. And people say, well, that's nice. But then again, light is a form of electromagnetic energy, the only one perceptible to the human eye. And because there's a lot of things in the electromagnetic spectrum outside of white light. There's infrared, ultraviolet, gamma rays, X-rays, radio waves. I mean, you can go on and on. There's this huge. So if you think, like, hold up a yardstick or a meter stick for our friends outside the US, the part or the area that we can see on that yardstick is about 2 millimeters. In other words, that a very tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum is visible to the human eye. So there's so much beyond our physical perception. And the cool thing is our technology, it's getting there. I mean, think about people that are using night vision goggles. They're able to see things that you simply can't with the naked eye. And I don't necessarily want to get into this unless you do, but it's fascinating that since green night vision goggles have been issued, the U.S. military's reports of UFOs have gone off the scale because they're able to perceive these objects that you may not with the naked eye.
That is fascinating, but I want to talk about how you became interested in this topic in the first place. You're an Oxford educated attorney, which doesn't really correlate with the spiritual path typically. So, what brought you here?
I was born into a family of psychic mediums. I discovered that this ability appears to be what's known as a recessive genetic trait. So everything I do involves some type of scientific research, and even the fact that I'm a medium. Both my parents had these abilities, and my dad was a NASA engineer, and before that, he was a Navy SEAL. Okay, real no nonsense guy. My mother was a commercial illustrator and artist, but then there's people that had these abilities that I've been able to track all the way back into the 1890s. So that's why in my bio it says I'm a fourth generation psychic medium. I tend to feel that it's more like a, you know, 200th generation, because what it is, the stories, the records beyond the 1890s are all but non-existent. And when I was a little boy and up into my teens, I was still able to talk to some of the grandparent and great grandparent level people who could tell me stories about these people that had these abilities. And so when you have two parents with the same recessive genetic trait, then the likelihood one of their children is going to have this increases exponentially. And then that child happened to be me. I have an older brother and an older sister, and they're very sensitive psychically. My brother's really good at precognitive, like he'll pick up on things before they happen. And my sister is too, but neither one of them are mediums. And so I kind of, as they say, I got the whole package.
You've also had a near-death experience.
I did, and I wrote about that in the Afterlife Frequency. See, when I was about 3.5 years old, I started seeing spirits, and I started interacting with them, and then my parents were able to see them too. And I remember my mom was like, "Oh wow, he's got it," and my dad was like, "Oh geez, he's got it," because my dad was concerned. He didn't want something bad to happen to me, and the reason for that is his sister Marjorie. He had four siblings, three sisters and a brother, and he and his sister Marjorie were the mediums. The other three didn't inherit that ability, as was their mother Grace and their maternal grandmother Isabel. All had these abilities. And Marjorie's story is rather sad. About 20 years before I was born, she was married to this guy who was a religious extremist, and he didn't like her abilities. He was all chapter, line, and verse, and these are evil, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, there's plenty of incidents and passages in scripture where people who see spirits are actually the good guys. It just, depends. I call it salad bar Christianity. You get to pick and, you don't get to pick and choose which verses to persecute somebody. You have to take the document as a whole. Long story short, he was a machinist. He was getting ready to go to work one day at a machine shop at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. And Marjorie started having a terrible premonition that something horrible would happen to him, begged him to stay home from work. They got into a big argument. He said, "Fine, I'll stay home." So he did. And that day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and then the cable snapped and the beams crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. Now, you'd think that would have changed his opinion on her abilities, but what he did, it intensified his fear. So he conspired with an unscrupulous psychiatrist who diagnosed Marjorie without an exam that she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and she was forcibly removed from her home, taken against her will to a mental institution where she was subjected to electroshock therapy for over 6 months. They damaged her brain so much that she was a shadow of what she'd once been. She never talked about spirits. She was quiet. She was very, very withdrawn. And the thing is, I never met my Aunt Marjorie in the physical. And the fascinating thing is she comes to me quite a bit, and I do write about that in Evidence of Eternity and in the Afterlife Frequency. And so when I was getting ready to start school, I was about 5 years old. I was 5 years old and I was getting ready to start Catholic school. And my father said to me, "Don't tell anyone about these things. Because people say that get taken away." And see, I didn't know about my Aunt Marjorie until I was older. So dad wasn't necessarily trying to scare me. When he saw I was frightened, I remember he held me. And my dad was a tough guy. He was a Navy SEAL, but man, he was a loving father. He said, "A real man's never afraid to say, 'I love you.' And a real man's never afraid to cry for someone he loves who died." And it's like, wow, I'm so privileged to have had him as my father. And so I realized pretty quick, because when I was in Catholic school, I thought, oh, they're talking about angels and saints and all these invisible entities. And then I learned real quick, don't talk about what we do at home, okay? Because this was not something that was embraced, shall we say. And then as I got older, I was very drawn to the spiritual, to the clergy, but I decided for me, and I'm not saying this for other people because we all have our own spiritual paths, that it was too confining and restrictive and too many rules and regulations. So I ended up going into law. I mean, it's like, talk about, jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. And I had a reputation in the legal profession for being, I would say, a bit odd because I knew things about other people, especially in trial, that I shouldn't have known. Yeah, because I could pick up and I can read energy and see auras and things like that. So that's how I became known as the psychic lawyer in a nutshell.
Wow. Let me get back to science for just a minute and talk about Albert Einstein, where he said, matter is energy and energy is light, and we are beings of light. Is that a statement of spirituality or science?
Or both. And it's really cool, that statement, because light, of course, is the only form of electromagnetic energy that we can see. Also, think about in near-death experiences, what if people go through a tunnel into the light? Throughout history, people talk about when they encounter the divine power we call God, they describe it in terms of light. Think about Moses encountering the burning bush, the bush that burned yet did not burn. And the thing is, if you lived in the Bronze Age, how would you describe an interaction with an intense form of electromagnetic energy? You would be using the vernacular, the terminology you're familiar with. And in 1500 BC or 1300 BC, that's when it's estimated that Moses lived. The most powerful form of energy you would be familiar with would be fire, outside of lightning. You look at the Pentecost in the New Testament, after Jesus has, ascended, after he's resurrected and ascended, according to the scripture. The disciples of Jesus and Mother Mary are together in a room, and they talk about tongues of fire appearing above their head as the Holy Spirit enters them. Well, for people who are able to see auras, you see an energy field around somebody, and you see a little flickery thing at the top. The crown chakra flickers. Well, how would you describe that in the Iron Age? Like a tongue of fire. Now, why am I saying all this? Well, in the 1920s, and it's been rediscovered and ratified and proven in the 21st century, our cells, our individual cells in our body produce flashes of light known as ultra weak photonic emissions. They've been come to be known as biophotons. In 2012, I believe it was, MIT issued a study that said it appears that our cells use light for inter and intracellular communication. In other words, our bodies are generating flashes of light. Now, the fascinating thing about biophotons is it's so small, you can't see it with the human eye. You need sophisticated technology in order to see this. You know, do you ever think like when you step on a Lego and all of a sudden, you feel it right away? Well, that message is getting to your brain pretty darn fast, like at the speed of light. Okay. So we now know that from our cells to the light of the sun to encountering the divine, it's all the same light, isn't it? And so what Einstein said, we are all light beings, it's a scientific statement because, of course, at the subatomic electromagnetic level, and light is electromagnetic energy. Yes, we're all that same energy, but our very cells produce the same form of white light that we see in the sun, and also that people perceive in intensely spiritual experiences. So that's why that statement, I believe, is both spiritual and scientific.
Does understanding the electromagnetic soul as pure energy support the theory that humans are multidimensional beings?
I believe that it does. Think of your brain as a computer hard drive, and I mentioned that earlier, and you got your electromagnetic soul in there. Okay. However, that electromagnetic soul emits waves of frequency, and other electromagnetic souls, meaning spirits, will interface with that. Okay. And so what that means is we are connected to something bigger than ourselves. This is what I call the afterlife frequency, also the collective consciousness. Now, multidimensional. This means that we live in the material world. Let's call it AM radio. The other side, the afterlife frequency, is FM radio, so that when you physically die, your electromagnetic soul is like a drop of water that it leaves your body and plunges in this eternal sea of FM radio. Okay, so you got these two energetic systems that coexist, yet sometimes they overlap. So when we die, we quantum leap from one dimension to another. Now, what's even cooler is the Schwarzschild quantum lattice theory. One of Albert Einstein's friends, Carl Schwarzschild, theorized that electrons, which are subatomic particles, can disappear from one area and then reappear in another without going through the matter in between. This has been recreated in laboratories, and the ongoing theory is that the electron goes into a tiny black hole, which makes it quantum leap from one dimension to another. So think about it. We're composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons. So I always tell people, those days where you just kind of don't feel like you're with it and you're all there? Well, you're not, because you never are, because your electrons are always popping from this dimension to another one. And the thing is, this is also part of what quantum physics is teaching us about the fact that our electromagnetic soul is capable of interfacing with, communicating with other dimensions. So therefore, we are multidimensional beings. There's more to it than that, but I'm giving you the short version.
And there's a phenomena that's recently just started being studied. It happens near the point of death called terminal lucidity. Can you explain what that is, and how does that correlate to letting us know or contributing to the research of who we are?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked about terminal lucidity, because this is such an amazing phenomenon. Professor Michael Naum from Germany, is the one who came up with the term terminal lucidity. The thing is, this has been observed for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Herodotus, no, not Herodotus, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, chronicled about people that were comatose or non-responsive. And then all of a sudden, they seemed lucid and coherent. Let me bring it up to our day. There will be somebody who may be comatose, non-responsive. And the thing about terminal lucidity, it isn't just one particular problem. Somebody may be essentially inactive brain-wise. Their body's still alive. They may have brain cancer. They could have severe head injury. They could be severely schizophrenic. They could be in advanced stages of Alzheimer's. There's many different forms of brain injury, brain damage. Could be both medical and physically induced. Or when I say medically induced, I mean it could be a disease. And that person hasn't been able to communicate, and then right before they die, they open up their eyes and they're able to speak, they're coherent, and they will acknowledge the people around them. They will basically snap out of this, and then they'll die. One thing neuroscientists do agree on is you don't grow another billion neurons in your brain right before death. And it defies medical explanation. How is somebody whose brain is severely damaged, they haven't been able to talk or even open their eyes, suddenly gain lucidity? Terminal lucidity means they're terminal, they're going to die and they become lucid. Why is that? Well, my theory, and I've put this forth in the Afterlife Frequency. You ever seen an incandescent light bulb that gets real bright before it burns out? We've all seen that, right? It's like,
Right.
oh my gosh, you know. And when I was a kid, you know, before we had the little cool LED lights on Christmas trees, you know, you get that, you know, but you know, even today, I still use some incandescent bulbs. But what's going on there? All right, you have the filament, and the filament uses tungsten. So when a light bulb is functioning properly, the filament is what regulates the flow of electricity through it. And so when the light bulb is, AKA healthy, functioning normally, and it's the tungsten that the electricity goes through. But over time, the tungsten begins to deteriorate. And so the light bulb is no longer able to properly handle that amount of electricity. And all of a sudden, there's a flash, a surge of energy prior to it going out. Take the human brain, okay? It uses 20% of the body's electromagnetic energy. And when things are all well and good, that energy is flowing through just like the filament and the tungsten. But as the brain begins to degrade, just like the tungsten, and is no longer able to handle that amount of electricity in several cases, and this has been documented all over the world, and it's becoming more and more recognized and admitted, because for a long time, you know, the doctors were afraid to mention it and all that, but now not so much. It's the same principle. The brain's no longer able to channel that amount of electricity, and then all of a sudden there's a surge. People come out of it, they're able to communicate. So what does that prove? Because we think that the brain, and it does control our bodily functions, but it also shows us that there is more to our consciousness and to who and what we are than the brain and my, once again, electromagnetic soul. So there's a spiritual, a spiritual energy, which is electromagnetic energy, which enables people to have this type of coherence. We've also seen this phenomenon in animals. Like right before an animal dies, I mean, it'll wake up. In fact, I know one woman, she was holding her cat who was basically non-responsive, and all of a sudden her cat opened his eyes, took his paw, touched her face, and then died. So animals have souls. They have electromagnetic souls. They have electrical energy. Humans certainly do. And so this goes to Tia to demonstrate that we are more than the sum of the parts of our body. The brain is an extremely complex organ, but it's also a carbon-12 resonator floating in water. Yes, electricity flows through it. Yes, it's extremely sophisticated. And yes, when people have a stroke or they have brain damage, it affects your ability to walk. But the who and what we are and talk and think, but the who and what we are is inside there. It's like I've known a number of people in my life with cerebral palsy, and you can hear the way they talk and the way they move, and they're not stupid. It's just that there's a issue with the electrical signals from their brain getting to their muscles. And I've communicated with spirits of many people who in life were paralyzed or brain injured or had cerebral palsy. And when they come through, they are super coherent. So that to me also underscores that the physical is just a container for what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy.
I love the analogy of the light bulb because that makes it understandable for me. I can see what you're saying. So, in other words, uh, our brain is the regulator of the external energy that is flowing into us.
Exactly. And it gets back to energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Um, And yeah, it's because I remember when I was studying this, and then all of a sudden I was looking at a light bulb, and I said, "Wait a second."
Mm-hmm.
I started studying the light bulb, and did all the research on it, and then I was looking at the brain and the neuron. And of course, the brain's super. I mean, the most complicated device known to humanity, but it still operates on electrical impulses and chemical reactions, but there's more to it than that. And that gets back to everything is explainable, even the spiritual, through science. It's just whether or not our science has progressed to the point where we can detect it and explain it.
So, if there's an external energy coming into us and our brain is regulating that and making this internal or what we perceive as an external experience, when we die, do we still retain a sense of who we are?
Well, I know that for a fact because I talk to spirits on pretty much a daily basis. I've conducted readings probably for about 15,000 people in my lives, in my life, in my lives. That's a whole nother discussion. Um, but yes, the spirits come through and they retain the memories. What dies is the body, is the physical ailments, the mental pain, dysfunction. In other words, let's say that somebody was chronically or clinically depressed, or somebody may have been even mentally ill. Their spirit isn't, but they're aware of what they did. I mean, I've even communicated with spirits of some pretty horrific people, including serial killers, and they're aware of what they did. Um, but as a spirit, they're not that, I'll use the word evil person, but they are certainly aware of what they did. And I know we're getting into a whole different, we're getting to some uncharted waters right here, but everybody's life matters, everybody counts. It's just that we have different parts that we're playing.
And going back to terminal lucidity, is that the same thing as a deathbed vision?
No, but they're related, if you will, because many times during terminal lucidity, when somebody comes out of the comatose or the non-responsive state, not only will they recognize people around them, but they'll start talking about loved ones in spirit who are there to greet them. So to have a deathbed vision, you don't have to be mentally non-responsive, which is a requirement of terminal lucidity. So let's focus on a deathbed vision. Once again, they've been reported for thousands of years. And what happens in a deathbed vision, hospice workers notice this, medical professionals, this has been reported for a long time and recorded. And then Dr. Raymond Moody who coined the term near-death experience, and Dr. Bruce Grayson, International Association for Near-Death Studies, and other scientists started tracking the deathbed visions. I've myself seen them happen, where somebody will say, "Oh, Aunt Gertrude's here. Oh, so and so," and people are saying, "Oh, it's a hallucination." Except in several situations, families have called me to when a loved one is dying, and I'll start picking up on the spirits around them. And I'll start describing them. I'll even get names. I was at the bedside of one woman in 20, I think it was like 20, 24, 25 spirits came through. Her children were able to identify something like 20 of them. The others, it seemed like they were a couple generations back, like on the great grandparent level. I mean, I said, there's a spirit of an orange tabby cat, and I'm hearing the weirdest name, like Harpo. And they said, "Oh, dear God." And I said, "What?" They go, 40 years ago, our mom had an orange tabby cat she named Harpo. Now, how is that a coincidence? Betty White, the last of the Golden Girls. I mean, think about Betty White. I mean, talk about someone whose lifetime spanned from the inception of television all the way up. I mean, she was on she was on all these shows in the 1950s, and she was on Golden Girls, Mary Tyler Moore. She had a Hot in Cleveland show. She even did a Super Bowl ad a couple years before she died. And when back in the 1960s, she was on a game show, and the host of the show was Alan Ludden. And she was smitten by him, and he her. And he was the love of her life. I mean, in Betty White, Alan Ludden were inseparable, and then he died in the 1980s. And they said that Betty White, she never was interested in ever, meeting anyone again. She said, "Alan was the love of my life." She died on New Year's Eve of, I believe it was 2021. Could have been 2022. I forget the exact year. Just shy of her 100th birthday, like a couple weeks. And she was in declining health, and she was there in bed, and she was winding down. Her healthcare provider, her caretaker, was there, along with actress Vicki Lawrence. And Vicki Lawrence used to be on Mama's Family. She played Mama, and she was Betty White's one of her best friends. And they said at the moment, just a moment before her death, Betty looked up, smiled, and said, "Alan." And then she died. Alan Ludden's spirit was there to greet her when she left her body.
Oh, that is just so lovely and so comforting to those who have lost loved ones that we will be reunited with them. They're going to greet us when it's our turn.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will. And death is it's difficult for all of us. Even though I can do what I do, I still I miss my parents. I miss them every day. Because what it is, I miss the physical presence. And what we have to understand is that when someone we love dies, our relationship transforms from one of a physical nature to one of a spiritual nature. And it takes time to get to that point. A lot of people want to hold on to the physical. They'll keep, let's say, a room of a child who's died. They'll keep it exactly the way it was. It's like a shrine to that child. And I'm not being critical. Okay, grief is a very difficult thing, but it is part of the human condition. Then there are other people who will embrace their spirituality. They want to learn about, what we know happens after somebody physically dies. And then they want to get to that point where the relationship goes from the physical to the spiritual. But grief it's a road nobody wants to take. But unfortunately, we are kicked down it at some point in our life.
How can we transform that experience and come to terms with, or at least be able to handle it better from a physical to a non-physical or spiritual relationship with our loved ones.
You know, Tia, that is such, I'm so glad that you asked that. We have to keep in mind that grief is a lifetime journey. I wish it had an expiration date. We all do. You know, we all wish we had that, you know, there's the magic Harry Potter wand, Lengardian Leviosa or whatever, you know, that we could just wave and get that pain out of us. But it's also part of the human condition. And grief is debilitating. It is crushing, but it is also an opportunity for us to grow emotionally and mentally and spiritually. Um, and I'm not, by saying that, I'm not negating or taking away from anything anyone is going through. Reach out to your friends and family. Don't go through grief alone. Turn to your faith community. If you don't have a belief system, counseling, secular counseling is fine. Some people find mediumistic contact, in other words, coming to someone like me to facilitate communication with their loved ones in spirit. That's an important and very beneficial therapeutic step in the journey through grief. You have to give yourself time. And you also have to realize that there will be days that emotionally you're going to take 2 steps forward, and then there's days you're going to fall back 10 steps. But it is a lifetime process. And the objective of the journey through grief is to accept the reality of the death. And through that acceptance, you will find a place of inner peace. That doesn't mean I'm all happy, but that inner peace means you're now able to live with it. And through that inner peace, you're going to start to progress. So that is how we learn to go from a physical to a spiritual relationship with someone we know who's died.
Sometimes there are other strange phenomena that happen surrounding death, such as a shared death experience, and that is what happened to me. I actually had a shared death experience as well. Um, how can we explain that where there is no dying on the part of the person who's experiencing
You,
this
you get me all
phenomenon?
excited now because when you said that, now I want to hear about your shared death experience. A shared death experience and a deathbed vision, they overlap in certain situations. So let's say that there's somebody who is dying. Okay, we know that this person's dying, and then people around that person at the time of the person's death or before it, they may see the spirits that are coming to greet that person, or at the time of death they will see the spirits that are welcoming the person. They may see a surge of light come out of the person's body. They may feel like they're being lifted up, like they're a little bit like floating sensation. They may hear beautiful music. They may, for a moment, get a sense of awesome peace. Here's what's going on. The electromagnetic soul of the person who is transitioning is now leaving their body. It's like liftoff, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and it's expanding. And that electromagnetic soul's EM pulses now interface with the electromagnetic souls of the people around that person, even those who are in no imminent danger of physically dying. And that EMS of the transitioning person is now interfacing with the higher frequency of the other side, the afterlife frequency. So energetically, everybody for maybe a few moments gets caught up in that frequency overlap. It's kind of like, let's say you're in your car and you're listening to AM radio and you're driving down the highway and you see a radio station by the side of the highway, and all of a sudden on the AM radio, you start hearing some music that is coming from the FM station. Remember before, and I was saying, the other side's FM radio or AM radio? Well, there's times when the frequencies overlap, and that's what happens in a shared death experience, is that the frequencies of the electromagnetic soul, the person in transition, overlaps with the frequency of the people in close proximity, and all of that overlaps with the other dimension. Remember before you asked, are we multidimensional? Well, there is a good example of it. And you have been, I would say, honored to have had that experience.
Yeah, you had your own shared death experience with someone?
Oh yeah. Well, I've been called to a number of bedsides when people are passing, so I get there and yes, and I see what's going on, and that's why I remember I was saying I was picking up on all the spirits, and the family was writing it down and verifying all that too.
Are there any accounts of shared death experiences that involve more than one person that continues living?
Yes, and there's a great story about that, which I'm not going to give away, but it's in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, and it involves a team of highly specialized firefighters. And I'll just leave it at that.
Mark, this has been amazing. I've enjoyed every minute, and it was a great honor to have you with me today. If my viewers wanted to reach out to you, how can they find you?
I would like to invite everyone to visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, just like my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency. Please sign up for my newsletter. You can tune into my weekly live stream show, The Psychic in the Doc. It's on 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. My co-host, Dr. Pat Baccili, is a world-renowned behavioral psychologist. We take calls from listeners. So people call in, I'll do a reading for you, and Dr. Pat is an expert. She will help you understand what the messages mean. I also write for Best Holistic Life magazine, and you can find out about my books all by visiting afterlifefrequency.com. And also there's a tab there for signing up for a session with me as well. Tia, thank you so very much. It's been such an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, the honor was all mine. And if you had one message that you would want the audience to take away from our conversation today, what would that be?
That the divine power we call God exists, that heaven, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it, exists, that our souls are immortal living spirits, that we can communicate with souls, and that we will all be reunited with our loved ones in the afterlife frequency when it is our time, our appointed time to leave this material world.
That is a beautiful closing message. Thank you again, Mark, for sharing your experience and your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.